Welcome. These sessions will be recorded. I'm pleased you could join us for the Business Education Resilience webinars with 1917. My name is Pauline Marquardt, and I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Bowie Chamber of Commerce, which is made up of members with common interests and concerns related to businesses and the environment in the Bowie area. It is the primary professional trade organization in the Greater Bowie area dedicated to protection, enhancement, and success of Bowie businesses and the business community. The Bowie COVID-19 Business Recovery Assistance Program delivers online technical assistance to help Bowie businesses accelerate their post-pandemic economic recovery. This program is a collaboration between the Greater Bowie Chamber of Commerce and the Bowie Business Innovation Center and funded by the City of Bowie. During this webinar, it is best to be comfortable with your video on. Remember to mute yourself. Please ask questions through the chat unless otherwise directed. Welcome, William Eric Lindsay, Senior Business Counselor of 1917.
Good afternoon, Pauline. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, special day, I heard.
Oh, you're silly, but yes, it is.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was thank you for being here. I know it's your birthday. You didn't have to be here, so I wish you all the best on your birthday.
I wanted to hear everybody say happy birthday to me.
I know. Works every time. But we'll probably sing it at the end. Save the best for last. So thanks again, Pauline, for having me here and my team. My name is William Eric Lindsay. I'm a business coach and senior business consultant and the owner of 1917. And we work with businesses in getting their businesses fit, their business operations fit for growth. So the first thing I want to say is, hey, Pauline, thank you, and to the Greater Bowie Chamber of Commerce and to the board of the Greater Bowie Chamber of Commerce, thank you for selecting myself, my company, and my just amazing team, my truly amazing team of friends, actually, and just colleagues that we've known each other for so many years, that, to bring just excellence to everyone. And thank you for selecting us and putting this forward. So just want to always share my gratitude with the Greater Bowie Chamber of Commerce and to you, Pauline. So a little bit about the Resilience webinar series. It's a 2-section series. Each section had 12 webinar, total of 25 webinars. So we are in section 2, webinar number 7. Kezi is going to be doing a presentation today, and she's right there in the wings, and you can see her just waiting to jump in and talk about what she's going to talk about. It's going to be a great webinar. The idea behind these webinars is a programmatic approach. So we always start with the beginning in terms of a person's business, because we all start off with a goal, and we always start webinar 1 with a goal. And then we just built from that goal setting webinar to, business planning, financial literacy. We even had Roderick Johnson from the SBA talk about the PPP and the EIDL program and how it impacts businesses. And, once you get to a point where you start building your business, you're growing your business, you certainly want to be at a point where you're talking about your human assets, your people of the business, the individuals who make your business work for you and your customers. And this is what Kezi is going to talk about today. So this is going to be a good one. And our grand finale is July 15th, where we have a pitch your business competition. So a lot of the folks who were here and took a lot of the information, they'll have an opportunity to sort of pitch their business and to figure out what their ask is in their business. And it's just a way to, number 1, market their businesses here in the Bowie area, and number 2, just kind of like get their business out there. And it's a good practice as well. And of course, we're selecting a first place winner, but we also added a second and third place winner that we're gonna include in the competition. So my pitch to you and my ask to you is just to come back to the remaining webinars. Share this information with your colleagues and those that you think may get a lot out of these webinars. They're also posted online. Pauline's going to share that link with us shortly. But please just go ahead and share that information with us, with your colleagues. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kezi. I'm not going to introduce her. She's going to talk about herself in a minute, and all I can say is that this is going to be great stuff. I've known Kezi for a long time. She's done a lot of work in the DC area and far beyond the DC area. So she has a very good experience in what she's doing. So Kezi, with that, nice to have you here and
Thank you.
take it over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eric, for that warm introduction. And Pauline, thank you for allowing us to spend time sharing strategies and tips, hopefully to help folks grow their businesses. So I'm going to say hello to those who've joined us. Before we get into our subject matter at hand, as Eric alluded to, I have years of experience working in particular with small businesses. That's my passion. I love working with companies and their CEOs and leaders to improve, grow, and sustain their organizations. And I think one of my proudest moments was being able to serve for a number of years as an SBA 7J management and technical trainer, working with companies that were either doing federal work, wanting to increase their federal contracts, or just looking to figure out how to do it. So I'm particularly pleased to be with you. I'm in the DMV. I'll be sure to share my contact information. So, if you want to stay connected, let's do it. And just really always want to hear about how folks have used the information we've talked about to grow their businesses. So tonight we're talking about building high performance teams. But here's a twist. This is also National Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're going to be combining two subject matters. So we're talking about growing, building upon, and increasing your operations, your capacity, those teams. But at the same time, we're also going to weave into it some things that we can do to support our team's mental and emotional health. So before we go on, I want to hear from you in the chat. Would you post in the chat your company name and how many employees you have? And this is a great way to stay connected with one another. So please don't be shy. If anyone who knows me will tell you, I love the interactive approach. So we're gonna team up. If you want to turn on your video, even better, so we can see your lovely faces. So if you put in the chat your business, perhaps who you serve, what your product or service is, and if you have any employees. So if you could post that in the chat while we are preparing to get started. And so I do have a presentation that I'm sharing with you. And I'll kind of move back and forth because again, I want to be able to interact with you, but we have some great information that I'm hoping you use for your company. So what are we going to talk about? Before we even delve into building a high performance team, we have to define it. What does that mean for you? Especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, returning to our workplaces, perhaps having a hybrid work schedule for our teams. But we're also going to talk about the importance of understanding your team's peak performance habits, or PPH, because they certainly do impact your team members' moods, how they do work, how in many instances they're communicating with their coworkers or with you or other managers. We're going to spend some time also talking about ways to help your team members become super adapters. So we've spent more than a year working from home. Now the conversations have shifted to coming back to the workplace in many instances. And so their adaptability really is essential now. And we'll talk through some of the trends that are happening for folks who are preparing to go back into the workplace. And then finally, we spent all this time, planning for, supporting, and managing our teams, but what about us? So we're going to spend some time talking about CEO self-care, because we have to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of others. So those are our goals and objectives. As we kind of navigate through the information, if you have any questions, feel free to post in the chat. Eric is going to be on the lookout as well for questions, so you can also raise your hand and ask, but interactive. And if there's a particular issue that you're going through, feel free to share that too, and hopefully we'll have a chance to help you navigate it. So with that being said, candid conversations, any questions. And the last thing I'll just spotlight is I do have some resources for you. So we'll send some through the chat. And again, if you need more resources, feel free to reach out. So, in order for us to put together high performance teams, we have to define it. And we're going to talk through some strategies to help us get these high performance teams. So sneak peek strategy one, again, has to do with looking at the peak performance habits, the PPH, to build effective teams. We're going to talk about becoming a super adapter, and finally building a support system, not only for your team, but for yourself. So, the small business majority has some great resources. And since the pandemic started, they've been tracking some of the concerns and things that small business owners care about, specifically in the DMV, but also across the country. And so this updated survey was actually, the results were actually released the end of January. They haven't done another one since, but it's very interesting to kind of do a pulse check to see if some of the issues that were on small business owners' minds in January are still the case. So let's take a quick walk through some of those issues. And I'm curious to know from the attendees if this applies to you as well. So the biggest issue that small business owners were facing in terms of survivability. So as we walk through this, let's switch from going from survival mode into thriving mode. Attracting customers, building the online presence, so letting people know you're out there, improving health and safety for your employees. So these are the top three. But taking a look at the rest of the concerns for small business owners, I'm wondering if any of you agree. Do you agree? Have you encountered the same issues, or are these three issues still prevalent for you? Attracting the right customers, having the online presence, and health and wellness in the workplace. And so if you want to talk about it, feel free to either unmute yourself or put your comment in the chat. And again, we're trying to get that interactive conversation going. So does anyone have any comments about the small business majority survey? Do you agree, disagree that those are the top three issues? Anyone want to share? Okay. So all I'll say, and this is actually one of the resources I want to share with you, because the report is really interesting and you can read it at your leisure. We'll put it in the chat in a moment. So I have a reality check for us. So if we're thinking about resources that you need to either maintain or increase productivity and performance, again, as we kind of re-enter our workspaces, are your needs financial, bandwidth or capacity, time, human capital or staff, or other? So I would like for you to share that, so that, as we kind of move along, I can speak to issues that maybe are of concern to most of the participants. So what resources do you need to get through, and again, thrive, not survive, but thrive? Financial resources, capacity, time, we all can use a little bit more time, human capital, staff, or other. And if someone actually wants to talk about it, that would be great. Anyone want to speak up? Unmute yourself. Okay. Okay.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes.
I'm just trying to
Okay.
get in there.
Okay. So talk to us.
I've been trying to close out some things, including eating, because I'm like jumping from one Zoom to another. Hello, everybody.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, how you doing, Eric? It's always good to see you, sir. Capital. I'm in a growing phase despite COVID, because of government contracting. I'm the president and CEO of Civility Management Solutions, and we're predominantly in professional consulting services with the federal government. Have, other than being in the game now almost 9 years and having some great past performance and growing, making the M5000 list, COVID hit, we obtained a couple of new contracts. And so the 8A program I'm a participant on, as well as Women in Service Disabled Veteran, they added another year for us that are 8A companies to get an extended period of time So basically, you know, in order for me to continue to really grow and utilize our past performance to now even compete capital. I'm fortunate to have some very good relationships and some people that's very much so interested in working with me.
Right.
Some have been in the consultant status. They're ready to come on full time as employees, which is a huge, big deal to me, to help write proposals. And if they can't write them, to be able to use a consulting firm so that we don't miss out on going after something where we have a high win rate, right?
Right, exactly.
Because if we're not able to do that, then of course, A, we're not competing, and one day I'm going to fall off like all other 8As, and I refuse to be one of those. And B, you know, it won't allow me to bring in the employees and the staff that I need to get me through this time. So capital, I would say for Civility Management Solutions is the #1 thing, because finding personnel has not been one of my issues.
Okay. And number one, I appreciate your candid feedback. So I'll say in the context of thinking about building high performance teams, who within your network can you reach out to? So you mentioned bringing people in who can write specifically for a current RFP or RFQ that's out there, for example. So thinking through who within your network you can engage to get you, you know, up and running to respond, and then thinking through who you'll need from, and not necessarily an individual, but skill sets to help facilitate, you know, once you get that opportunity. So access to capital. And Lori, it is really good to see you. I don't know if you recall, but I actually did training with you a few years ago through the 7J program. Yes. So good to see you. Yes.
Thank you. I do recognize you, not knowing from what perspective, but okay, very good. Now your memory is really good.
And that's something. So yes, so I think most of us have access to capital on our minds. And does anyone else have any comments about, you know, the things that are continuing to be of concern as we emerge out of the pandemic? Okay. Well, we'll have a chance to talk about it as time moves on. So let's pause for a moment and talk about what high performance means, because, you know, Lori talked to us about some of the things that are on the radar for continuing on federal contracting, but for others, it may be something different. So this is actually a homework item for you that we're going to talk through a little bit while we're together. So one of the first things I would love for you guys to do after, if you want, the holiday vacation, but really keep it on your radar over the next week, defining what high performance means. So what does high performance mean for your organization, your company as a whole? So how can your company be a high performing company? And as you're thinking through that, what probably should pop up for you is looking at the different components that make up your business, and perhaps what are some of the areas that are weak or not as strong that may have difficulty supporting what you envision as high performance. So, you know, is your customer service performing greatly, and then maybe the service delivery needs to come up a little bit? So thinking through what high performance means and the departments within your organization. And so even if you're a smaller company where maybe it's you or maybe you and one or two other people, still think about what you and your team do on a day-to-day basis within your organization to help you define where you want to go, what that high performance goal is. And the same thing for thinking about management. So with your managers, you as CEO, directors or managers of your company, what does high performance mean for them and for you? And then for your team members or staff that support you, and we're talking about people who may be here with you in the DMV. Some of you may have satellite offices on the West Coast, maybe have offices outside of the country. So thinking through what high performance means for your team in all of your offices. And then finally, what does high performance mean to you as it relates to your customers and clients? And so I'll give you a quick example for us. So when we work through whether or not we're going to partner with someone and work with them, it is very important for them to have a high level of engagement, because that helps us deliver, helps keep that communication going. So if you have low energy customers and it's creating an issue, this is the time to think about how they fit into the equation of high performance, and to make sure that it's supporting your goals of increasing your performance in a specific way. And the one thing I also have on here is to note and consider the internal and external factors that will influence or support or maybe even hold back being a high performing team. So does anyone have a sense, anyone want to share who has a sense of what they would define as high performance? And you can put it in the chat or unmute yourself and share. But what are some specific things that will let you know you have a high performance team? Anyone want to share?
I will.
Okay, please.
And hopefully me talking is enough to bring some other people into
Yes, I'm going to call them, start calling on people.
Yeah, exactly. This is the reason why I jumped in on this one, because we're going through growing pains, and I've hired several new staff over this past year for the corporate office, not just, and I call them the team. So we have new team members because I have no employees on contract. So that's how I distinguish the difference between the two. Right. My thing is I offer people their last job. You know, that is my intent. And I make that very clear when I hire. Right. I'm not trying to have to replace you if you're working in the corporate office. Come and go and grow with me as I do my thing and be a part of the team. My company's name is Civility Management Solutions. So I've really claimed and stated my culture out the gate. And so anybody that kind of brings anything outside of that, I really don't care about their high performing whatevers. I'm not dealing with no gossiping in this office. You know, we're not dealing with backstabbing. We're not dealing with setup. I happen to be an African American woman. I have already lived enough of that corporate junk that I will not allow it inside of Civility Management Solutions. We're cleaning that whole picture. It's a bunch of women that work here, and even with that, we have really been able to maintain. With the growing pains, the new individuals that have come in, there has been that challenge. And high performing to me is an individual that is determined to be successful no matter what they're doing, and determined to grow and enjoy and embrace change. To me, that's a high performing person, because if you can't adapt to change and even desire for change, because if everything stays the same, it's a little dull to me, right?
Right.
I think that there's a takeaway of some negativity, because you're always going to be challenged every time we change something. You know, as simple as a meeting. Why do we have to have it at 2:00? It's like, we're not going to have a conversation about why we got to change a meeting. You know, it's just a change to adapt and adjust and just move forward. And so those are some of the things. To me, it's a lot of culture, because I can train you to do anything. But if your attitude is not right, you're never going to get to the other side of being someone that everyone can just look at and say, that's a bad dude, or that's a bad chick.
Exactly.
So that's my 2 cents on that.
Right. And Lori, I appreciate it, because you touched on what we'll be talking about next, the adaptability of your team, which is vital. And especially during the pandemic, when things change from moment to moment, and you have to just keep moving without having a lot of interference, sometimes from the team members who may not know the decision making, what's behind the decision making. So we'll talk about some of those too. So strategy 1, assess your team's peak performance. So this section, I think, can be incredibly helpful to figuring out how to assign your team members, how to engage your team members, and keep things flowing and not interrupt it. But before we talk about it, what I'm sharing with you is something that started as a tradition at the beginning of the pandemic. So we do a Friday feels. Sometimes we'll do it other days of the week, but it's a check-in. And so, using this little fun thing, we're able to spur conversations about how folks are really feeling. And that's important because a lot of times your team members will say, oh, I'm fine. But there's something that's going on behind the scenes that could impact or likely does impact their ability to perform. And it could be something completely unrelated to the work. It may be something in the household. Everyone's, still working. Well, most people are still working from home. So, being able to do these regular check-ins to figure out where folks are and how they're feeling, which ultimately, again, impacts the work. But this peak performance habits, the PPH, I encourage you, if you're not already doing this, to adopt this for your team, even if you have just a few people working with you. But knowing what time your team members are most alert and likely willing to engage and being effective is so important. And so, to the point of being adaptable and asking your team members to be adaptable, as CEOs and managers, we should be adaptable as well. And so, before the pandemic, it may have been a 9 to 5 situation, Monday through Friday, with the lunch break and a few breaks throughout the day. Well, now with working from home, perhaps with some team members, and again, it depends on the position and the work that needs to be performed, but maybe you have team members who are way more high energy, way more effective, way more engaged mid-morning or afternoon. So thinking about adapting the work, assigning the work in a way that does everything. They're able to do the work, but they're also able to use their peak performance time to get the work done. So for us, I am a morning person, kind of going a little bit into mid-morning, but in general, morning. We have one team member who is completely afternoon, late afternoon, and we make it work. And so I'm mindful of when I assign work, when I ask for work back, and even when she responds. So I think, that is an important part of being able to build a high performance team, because if someone is sluggish or tired or not in their peak performance mode, it could impact their creativity, their level of engagement. Knowing their work styles is critical as well. So are your team members super independent? Do they need a little bit of guidance? Do they shun guidance altogether? And I want to pause here because I think most of us have probably thought through this. What I want to kind of get you to think about as we're reopening is the work styles, and this includes the peak performance time, morning, mid-morning, afternoon, may have changed since the pandemic started. So the people that you relied on, for example, not to need a lot of guidance, may need extra guidance once they come back to the workplace. So, allowing yourself some time and grace to deal with maybe support that you didn't anticipate you would have to give specific employees. And then one of the other things I would encourage you to think about is broken into two teams. So one, the strengths of teams. So if you have assigned teams who are working on projects, as well as individual staff members, what are their strengths? And use their strengths to engage them in ongoing projects, or where you may need some support or skill set that they have. And at the same time, be mindful of some of the areas where they need improvement, so that you can offer, or your HR manager or whoever the appropriate person is, can provide some support to them. Again, especially as we re-enter our workplaces. So this peak performance really can be very, very helpful if you're using it. And so before we go on, I want to also talk about what I call the leadership imperative. So as we're thinking through building these high performance teams, or in some instances rebuilding as we come out of COVID, and juxtaposing that against some of the mental and emotional health support or advocacy that we're willing to do as leaders, I wanted to share with you 4 things under the leadership imperative that come directly from The Four Essential Roles of Leadership by Franklin Covey. And I'm not going to go into it a whole lot, but I wanted to share each one of the categories because there are things that we should be thinking about as managers. I'm actually a certified coach of the Four Essential Roles of Leadership. And I think it's an awesome and strategic and just loving approach to getting things done and leading people. And so I would love for us to think about how we inspire trust with our teams. So we're asking for high performance. In some instances, again, trying to figure out what this new work schedule looks like. Can your team trust you to follow through, keep your word? Are you consistent? Have you created a vision for your company? Perhaps during the pandemic over the past year or so, maybe you've redefined the vision, maybe even the mission. Is that vision clear? Have you communicated it to the team? And have you discussed with your staff how the roles that they play in moving that vision forward? Are you able to execute strategy? Is your strategic plan clear and actionable? Is it realistic? Have you implemented your strategic plan? So, with the work we've done, not only with our clients, but working with other organizations that support small businesses, a lot of people just started fresh with their strategic plan over the last year or so. So making sure that you are poised and ready to execute that strategy. And then lastly, for Coach Potential, are you coaching and mentoring your team? Are you finding an opportunity to, show support, give encouragement? Have you created an environment where your staff can actually mentor each other? So thinking through what mentoring means within your organization as well. So just some bullet points I want to go through for this particular strategy, which is know your team and yourself. Use that past performance habits slide to schedule your meetings, to figure out how you want to manage assigning work, and even deadlines and planning breaks and your team building activities. So the one thing that I am hoping everyone is still doing is having team building activities, even if they're virtual. Working with your teams to adjust their schedules as well. So really a lot of it has to do with communicating and giving your team members a heads up. Making sure that you're checking in with everyone. So some of you, and I know Lori mentioned she has consultants who are working with her. So, when I talk about team, I'm including everyone who performs work on your behalf, whether they are 9-to-5ers, whether they're 1099s, doesn't matter. Checking in with everyone, including interns, because interns sometimes are left out of certain conversations or decision-making processes. But if things are changing that impact them, making sure that you're checking with them is always a great way to go. So this next one may be a little controversial because, we're talking about adaptability and I'm saying establish a schedule and stick to it. It's really more of a way to create consistency. There are going to be times that things change, schedules change, but by being consistent, it promotes and conjures up reliability for your staff. And so having in an unstable world and during unstable times, it is great to have something that's consistent that they can rely upon. And then the last one I want to touch on is putting together and issuing an employee engagement survey. And so I have a sample of some of the questions that you can ask. And if you've never done an employee engagement survey, I highly recommend it because that helps you figure out what your employees are really thinking. You're not assuming what impressions they have or feel about COVID, reopening, management style, et cetera. So when we talk about getting employee feedback, there are several things that you can ask them for. You don't necessarily have to ask all these questions in one engagement survey. It depends on what your purpose is for the survey, but certainly touching on a number of these as we transition back from COVID, really zeroing in on their workload capacity and performance. And over the past year or so, a number of us may have either completely gotten away from or have altered how we do the performance evaluation process. And that is something that we really should do, even if you do it a little differently because of virtual work, but you don't want your employees to go more than a year without having a formal performance evaluation. So getting feedback on capacity and performance, the support they need for management, their work-life balance, community engagement, so volunteerism, the things that your company is still connected to even during COVID, your commitment to mental health and wellness. So what are some of the things that they would like the company to either implement, or maybe some things that you've been doing over the past year that they would like to keep, and maybe you thought about ditching once you get back into the workplace. So really taking the time to gauge their feedback, but also your willingness to act on their feedback and implement it, because there's nothing, well, almost nothing worse than asking your employees how they feel. They open up their hearts and they're giving you information candidly, and then nothing is done with it. So be prepared to act on the feedback that they give you. This next one I'm going to skip because I'm hoping that again, we're becoming adaptable. And so our second strategy has to do with adapting in the office. So I do have a question I really would love everyone to post in the chat, and I may call on someone. But do you have written COVID-19 related policies in place? So for example, policies on wearing masks for staff and customers, hybrid work schedule, remote working. I know the mask mandate for fully vaccinated people are going by the wayside tomorrow for Prince George's County and Montgomery County. But I'm curious to know if you have these policies in place. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, yes, no, or we're working on it now. Okay, I'll give you another second or so. Okay, so I see one response. So what I'll say is, for those of you who haven't responded, if you have not implemented your new policies, your COVID-19 related policies, please make sure that you're doing that before folks come back. And for those of you who say you already have your policies in place, please be sure to communicate that with your team well in advance of when you ask them to come back into the workplace. And I would encourage you to devote a team meeting, a staff meeting, specifically to the policies and procedures and the transitioning back into reopening, and then really let it be a fireside chat where you're able to talk with folks and be able to hear concerns, because you, like, even if it's not now, if you think about the new employees you're going to hire in the near future, you're probably going to hear something from them, just questions about coming back into the office. So for those of you who've already returned, you're probably pros at this now, but for those of you who are preparing, I think that's a good way to go. So in terms of becoming a super adapter, so this section, I'm talking about the staff as well as you as the leader, and organizing your workspace. When we talk about mental health and just really being in a peaceful environment, organizing your workspace is really helpful. Even for people who tend not to necessarily be organized, because you don't have to wade through a lot of stuff to get your day started. So I think this is just in general a good practice to have. And I have examples of cluttered space, a neater space. But I think what I want to focus on here are two things: streamlining your to-do list. So whether it's you as a CEO, or if you're trying to help your team members adapt to being back, the rule of three is very helpful and is something we've adopted and use regularly. So the rule of three is to pick 3 things on your agenda so that you're not overwhelmed, but you're still being productive and high performing. And so the first thing on the rule of 3 is what you need to do now, what you need to do next, and what you need to do later. So there are going to be some things sometimes where you're just focused on one. But if you work on the things that need to be done later in an incremental basis, that can help balance it out. So for your team members who are just trying to get their stride, even if they have been back in the office for a minute, that could be a good approach to keeping organized, but also helping them perform well and complete tasks. And then the other thing that is really helpful in adapting is making sure that you have contingency plans in place. So, now it probably would be figuring out who would step in if someone decides, I'm back in the office, this is not working for me. Can I go back to working from home? And so if that is a part of your policy, you're able to do that, just thinking through what some of those contingencies would be, or people who could step in when the person is out of the office. And then really providing clarity and guidance on those changing policies, and just again having a little bit of grace with your staff members who are asking a whole lot of questions. They may be feeling nervous, maybe trying to figure things out, but I talk about this later, but explaining the why behind these policy changes is very effective in getting people to understand what you have in mind and how it affects them, impacts them, or what role they play in these changes. And then just being mindful to avoid things that trigger frustration and anger. So, when we had this webinar before, there were still undercurrents about the election, and that tends to come up with this particular webinar. But now it's a lot of focus is on the violence that's going on, the racial justice things. So just being careful how you interact with your team members, and creating a safe space for people to feel heard, but not going over the line by having conversations that just really escalate. So we're looking to reduce conflict and create a harmonious environment, which ultimately lets people perform their jobs. So we're building high performance teams. We need to think about all these nuances that are in play here. And so, one of the things that any of us can do to help others perform, feel comfortable in the work environment, is to embrace the golden rule: do unto others as you have them to do to you. And, show again a little love and grace to your team members, especially those who may have a difficult time adjusting. And before I pause and ask for questions or go on, one of the things that I like for you to be mindful of is seasonal affective disorder. Sometimes people think of the wintertime, if you're in Alaska, you're not getting much light, but that disorder affects people during the spring and summertime as well. And for people who still feel uncomfortable about going out of the house or just being careful, it's a real thing for them. So, being mindful of that as you're engaging with your team members and staff. So I'm going to pause and ask if anyone has any, before we go on, if anyone has any questions, concerns, something that worked for you that could be helpful to the other participants. Does anyone want to share? Okay, no one wants to share. Lori, Lori, go ahead and share.
I mean,
go ahead.
I have something to say. So I was going to say it. But Civility Management Solutions actually implemented monthly check-ins, and we call them the Civility MS Touch Point. Mm-hmm. And it was just because, a lot of the federal employees, all the contracting team that's our employees, were able to work from home. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, how are they dealing with things? Like you just said, now they're around their family all the time. And, what's really going on with them mental health wise. And we provide training in Civility Management Solutions. So we brought on some of our 1099 consultants that are trainers, and they taught some classes on different subjects. But it was all about just trying to embrace them because everybody's at home. As of 2021, we've moved into quarterly. And I had wrote this out in my business plan years ago that we would have training with our employees, because again, I'm a true believer of care how great you are doing your job. If you're not a good person, if people don't like you, you're a detriment, you know, whether your corporate office or on contract. You know, the government people are like, when they see you in the morning, you know, I can lose that contract behind you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So trying to have a touch point with people was one thing we implemented, and was quite impressed at the turnout because a lot of people did jump in. They weren't as boisterous as like this crew here. I don't know who all here, but nobody got much to say. But they were there because they know they needed to receive some new information or just find something that they didn't know before to be encouraged and to spend time with other people.
And you know, and thank you, Lori. And to your point, I think that one of the things that we've heard a lot are people just really yearning for that human interaction and connection that we get, even if we're doing the fist bump or elbow bump, just being reconnected. So I love that example, Lori. Thank you for sharing that. And so to that end, it's really important to keep communication, the lines of communication open. So, you know, we talked about communicating the policies and procedures. One area that I've noticed is not always talked about widely as some of the other topics related to work from home or COVID are making sure that you're providing accommodations for staff with disabilities. And so just doing a check-in with not just on the policies and procedure side, but on the human side. You know, if you have people who have different disabilities, making sure that you're checking in to see if anything's needed to support them and engaging them instead of making them feel like they're not a part of the team. And so if you haven't created any internal newsletters or some kind of intranet or some communication vehicle for your team members to, let them know what's coming up within the company, celebrating new hires, that kind of thing, that's a great way to boost morale, even encourage some healthy competition among your team members. So having that communication vehicle internally, and again, really just emphasizing the why you have these policies in place. So, that's really helpful. And so I wanted to share with you something that we launched. So it's, are you the next work from home pro of the month? So, we always have this employee of the month, or employee, some, companies do employee of the quarter, or the annual recognition. So for those of you who still have people working from home long-term, if that's something you're going to keep, this is a neat idea to be able to celebrate and acknowledge the people who are still working from home who may feel disconnected. So this is one thing that you can do. So we're on our last strategy, and it has to do with building a support system for your team, but also for yourself. And so one thing I want us to keep at the forefront is that self-care isn't selfish. We have to decompress and take time for ourselves as managers and leaders, CEOs, and then encourage our staff to do the same thing. So in terms of building a support system, making sure as a manager that you are being mindful of the work, again, using that peak performance habits worksheet to monitor from afar your team members' sleeping, eating, or eating habits, their habits. And normally what can happen is if a person who is typically engaged, they're contributing, they're speaking up, if there's a noticeable change, it may be that they're not getting enough sleep. And while you can't control that, what you can do is during a monthly check-in or a training session or a guest session from a psychologist, if you choose to do that, is to make sure that there is some mention of making sure that you're getting enough sleep, eating, exercise. And so when we talk about planning a bit of fun, for your team, and this is whether people are still working virtually or in the office. Movie night. So over the past several months, we've been doing a virtual movie night. There's a streaming service that allows um, people who have their own individual accounts to connect at one time. So you're literally watching the same movie at the same time. You can react. So that's a nice touch. You know, if you can't be together, yoga sessions, nature walks. I love karaoke. We love karaoke. So that's something we're really excited about, getting back out into the world to actually have karaoke. Again, nature walks, having your team meetings or staff meeting, you know, in a park, a local park where people are still able to, you know, physically distance and feel comfortable. And the other thing, I'm really glad we're able to get back into physically, really our volunteer activities. So if you're doing community service or community interactions under your corporate social responsibility umbrella, or if your team members happen to support a particular charity or nonprofit organization, this is a great way to boost morale, to get folks connected in a way that's not necessarily work, but can have a pleasant effect on work. So those are just a few ideas. Okay. And then in terms of building a support system, other things you can do are rediscovering the things that motivate you and your team. So, you know, again, when you're doing that check-in, and so even for us, that how are you doing the Friday feels thing, that's specific for that weekly check-in. But still periodically when we're meeting, we always have space for people to be able to share what's on their mind. And usually you can pick up on some things depending on what they say, that can help you figure out as a manager how to motivate them, or how to motivate other people on the team. One of the things that we started during the pandemic that we're keeping is ordering, and often it's done as a surprise, although you'll have to let people know so that they're home to receive it, but we'll order healthy made meals through a food prep company. And so we'll do it for team meetings so that we can all have lunch together and they get it ahead of time. But then we also do it occasionally for the families. So, you know, in June, if we want to send something to maybe two of the families, it's a wonderful, healthy meal where they can enjoy it and, you know, not have to go out and buy it. We do gift cards for grocery store, gas station. So, you know, just really thinking of ways to boost morale, which is something that's just great to do anyway, but also can have a positive impact on the work. And then if you don't have a mentoring program, think about establishing one. So it can be informal or formal, wherever your capacity allows. One of the things that we do as well, we encourage our community to do, is if you have a strategic partner that maybe, you know, that person's a prime, you're subbing, or vice versa, if people at that company are willing to mentor your team members, that is a great exchange, and it's a way really to build those bonds, especially if you're doing a whole lot of work with the company, and have this extra bond going. That's a good way to allow mentoring for your team members as well. And then, so I love music. Any other music fans out here? So one of the things that you can do if music is your thing, and if it's not your thing, get someone on your team, because somebody likes music, to create a mood boosting playlist. So, and I'll share it in the link. We actually have one specifically for managing your mood on Spotify. And I always ask for recommendations. So I'm asking you guys to share recommendations too. But these are some of the songs that can get you pumped and going. And if you're having a hard time, can make you feel better, and thus, you know, be able to work and keep focused on what's going on. So if you have anything you want to add to the list, put it in the chat. But as I shared with you, I wanted to pause and reserve a little bit of time to talk about CEO self-care. So we have to take care of our teams, of course, but it's important for us to take care of ourselves. So one of the things that we've been doing since day one, so almost 20 years, is having strategy day. Now, over the years, sometimes we've gotten away from it, but last year I committed moving forward. And so Fridays are strategy days. So it's a day for a little bit of a retreat, being able to think through, challenges or where we want to go, or just thinking through things and planning, but not necessarily having a lot of external engagement. If that's necessary and you need to have someone dedicated to being able to reach out to a client, or if you're doing work where you have to have the access 24/7, I would say, get an on-call person. So we have backup project managers, that kind of thing. But your team really should have a moment to kind of step back, plan, and have that strategy, which has been really helpful in balancing out, for me personally, balancing out the work and keeping me refreshed and creative. So highly recommend the strategy day. And then for our CEOs, I would highly encourage you, if you're not doing this, and I would encourage you to do this formally, to engage 3 CEO mentors. One who can help you deal with, I'm going to say broadly, leadership or maybe even operational issues. One that can help you figure out challenges, barriers, successes, of dealing with your revenue. So in the example that Lori shared earlier in the session about access to capital, that kind of thing, having a fellow CEO who understands you, gets your issue, doesn't have to be in the same industry, and probably in many instances is a good thing because you can get different perspective. And then the third CEO mentor is one who can help you with your personal growth. So this person could ostensibly be a good girlfriend or a guy you're close to, who understands maybe more than your day-to-day work, and maybe knows some of the challenges and things that are going on in your life, just to be able to have someone who can listen, yes, offer advice as needed. I refer to this group as my cheerleading team. So when you're discouraged and you need a little bit of encouragement, this group is the go-to group. And then lastly, CEOs, rejuvenate, rest, and recommit to exercise. Get your rest in. And this last one, I think, is helpful for staff members. And, this is great to communicate that with them, but I really wanted to capture this under CEO self-care. Affirm, forgive, learn, and move on. So when things happen, people mess up, forgive them, learn from the experience, move on, let go of it, because holding those frustrations in does not allow you to have a high performance team, and your team will be able to pick up on those kinds of things as well. So let it go. And so before we go into the action planning, any questions, anything that stuck out or you want to talk about as we kind of segue into the action planning piece? And if you have something you want to share, please either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourselves. Okay. Okay. Yes. And so Lori says she operates on not being offended. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yes. That leads to tension and frustration. It's not a good way to spend our time. So under Ready, Set, Do. So we have a few resources for you. This one you can use for yourself, but this is actually a really good team building exercise that you can use with your staff. And it talks about the 3 areas we've gone through today. So knowing yourself or knowing thyself. Asking them which work or schedule patterns negatively impact their moods and emotions. You can also ask them to write down and be honest with themselves about, their adaptability, and why they're resisting change. And that's a good, so even if they don't share this with you, it's a good way for them to reflect on who they are, and, if they are willing to share it. So hopefully we're operating in an environment where our team members feel comfortable coming to us, or maybe to their fellow mentor in the workplace. So being able to share some of these things and how they can be a source of encouragement for their coworkers, your strategic partners that you're working with, and their families as well. And then using those three categories to then create some action items, things they want to do to know themselves better and figure out how to work more proactively, how they can encourage each other. So you will get the worksheet for this. And so you're looking at the snapshot, but it's actually over 2 pages and it gives them space to write it out. So you'll have that. And then as we move into the strategic action planning piece, and thinking through the 3 strategies we talked about. So knowing yourself and your team, encouraging them to become super adapters, and then thirdly, making sure that you're taking care of yourself as the CEO, self-care, and encouraging others. So you'll also have this template to work through your strategic goals. And so this is actually a helpful resource that we use for a whole lot of stuff. So for our purposes, it's about building your high performance team and checking in on folks with their emotional and spiritual and physical health and wellness during this time. But you can also use it for other categories as well. So let me walk you through it, and then quickly, as I'm walking you through it, please think about a strategic goal that you as a CEO can incorporate, can implement, that really will help you build your high performance team post pandemic. And the reality is we're talking about COVID-19, we're talking about reentering our workspaces, but you can also use these tips to help get you through any kind of uncertainty or hiccup that you're dealing with your company as well, and still have these high performance teams. So I'm going to walk through the categories, and I'm going to ask if someone's willing to share a strategic goal and perhaps maybe 1 or 2 things that will fall into these categories. So stakeholders, who is impacted by the strategic goal? So for example, if your goal is to implement, I'm just giving an example, the work from home pro of the month. If that's your goal to be able to implement something like that, who's impacted by that goal? Who on the team would be responsible for establishing it, creating it, and implementing it? What are some of the action items that are involved with implementing that particular program? And so in the template, you have 5 action items, but there could be more, perhaps less, but this is a guide for us. And then the other things to consider are what resources are needed to achieve that goal. So perhaps it's financial, maybe it's time devoted to rolling it out. Maybe it's another team member that you want to work on it with you or for you. What are due dates? So it could be the overall due date of rolling out the work from home pro, employee of the month, or it could be dates for each task associated with meeting that overall goal. And then finally, how will you measure the success of the goal, rolling it out? Is it that people are excited about it? Are you getting nominations from the team for other people? Are people celebrating? If you have, some kind of prize or acknowledgement that goes along with it, are people, sharing it on social media and really excited about it? So these are just examples of some of the things that may let you know that that program has been successful. So again, looking at what your strategic goal is, who your stakeholders are, who's going to be responsible for it, helping you implement it, the action items associated with it, what resources are needed, due dates, and then finally, how will you measure success? So I'm going to pause here and just ask, and I'm actually going to call on Sharon, if you don't mind. You knew I was coming for you. So I'm not going to ask you to flesh anything out. However, what I will ask you to share, okay, thank you for unmuting yourself. If you can talk through maybe 1 or 2 goals that you're thinking about moving forward with as a result of us talking through these strategies?
Oh, oh, oh boy. Specific to the strategies that we were, maybe I think the
It could be anything about
oh,
building your high performance team.
team building. I think that would be nice.
Okay. Okay. So I'm asking you, so is it creating a formal team building sessions? Is that what you mean? Or checking with the team?
Well,
Describe it a little bit.
I think so. Right now, we do check in. We speak to each other probably more. 8 in the morning. We have our um, we have our touch accountability calls. We call them, and then we meet almost every day at 5 o'clock, and we do like a virtual team because we're financial professionals. We're independent, and so we still get together. We're in multiple locations, different locations. So we get together virtually and plan our week out.
Okay.
So even though we're on Zoom together, and we're muted, but it's just the support that we get just being virtually together, right? And then sometimes you'll get a call and you can unmute yourself and be like, hey, I just got a call about blah blah blah, right? But I think what we can incorporate is fun. We are focused a lot on the business, where we are because we're not together, we're not doing fun things anymore.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you've got to have fun. And so I would just, you probably have already thought about this, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to think about people on your team who are inclined to fun to help you work on it and maybe make them a captain or co-captain. And that's really good too, because now you have people on your team who have a vested interest in and are moving that forward. So thank you so much, Sharon. And so I'm putting, as we wind down, I'm putting in the chat a resource, 8 free or low cost mental wellness apps that are courtesy of Employee Benefits News. So you may want to check that out. And so as we wind down, I'm also sharing on the screen additional resources. You will have the presentation. Pauline will share it with the participants. Our blog has some resources as well that you can pull from for your team members. And then this last one are top 25 mental health podcasts on FeedSpot. So very interesting podcasts that deal directly with mental health and wellness. So before we conclude, I just want to say thank you for your time. Hope you learned something. And before we go to Q&A, does anyone want to shout out one thing they learned or one thing they're going to commit to as a result of being together for this session? One person? One person shout out.
Building example.
Okay. So yes, yeah, you've given that. So Lori, would you like to share one? Actually, I'm going to ask you to hold for a second. Loveday, I'm going to put you on the spot if you don't mind. You can always say no, but I'm hoping you'll say yes. Is there one thing that you want to share? Okay, so Loveday is shy. So Lori, go ahead and share as we wrap up.
Adding consultants to our civilian MS touch points. Many of them are invited, but I don't think all. And so I just want to make sure we do make that all inclusive.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great plan. Yeah, get everyone involved, because people have different perspectives and they're typically helpful. So thank you so much. And I'm going to toss it over, Eric, to you to close us out. And I put my info in the chat. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'll put my email as well. But thank you for participating. And Eric, I'll toss it over to you.
Ezzy, thank you so much. This was, thank you. This was timely as we're starting to transition into opening or being more open as we transition post-pandemic. Having fun is probably one of the most important things because we see work as just being work. But if I have this motto when I work with my clients as well, Kezi, this is if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. That's kind of how
That's
I see
right.
it. And I love what Lori mentioned, and I have to shout out to Lori because I've known Lori for quite some time now. We've hung out once in a while, had a lot of laugh. That's how I remember Lori. You just laugh a lot, and I think that's something special because Lori is growing her business at CMS, and lots of awards. And also, thank you for your service, Lori. Really appreciate your service. That's very important. Just want to highlight that. So with that, I just want to say, great job, Kezi. Of course, just love having you on these webinars. Looking forward to your next one. And what I would like to do is just quickly share that, the next week we have our webinar, and it's going to be Carolina Gomez. She's our food industry expert, talking about food industry and resiliency in terms of pivoting, in terms of talking about restaurants. There's a lot of information that's been updated regarding restaurants. We've learned a lot in terms of the numbers and the data. So this is going to be a really interesting one, especially if you are directly related to the food industry, or even as a secondary or tertiary business to the food industry. This is going to be a really cool webinar to have next week. So definitely would want everyone to be there and share it. So with that, Pauline, I guess I'll turn over to you. Should I launch the poll now, or?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Thanks.
All right, here we go. Thanks, Pauline.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you could take a moment and answer the exit poll questions, that would be a great help to us. Another informative webinar by 1917 LLC. Thank you so much, Kessie. And thank you, William. And again, more than ever, we need business plans. And this concludes our event. Everyone have a great weekend.
Thank you.